He said 9:30. So we do have some time if we want to talk to Brock about, just kind of analysis of what happened and what we can expect for today.
Good morning, Brock. So with how things ended yesterday, what do you expect to hear this morning?
Well, Lou, as you said, trials are about storytelling, and we have so far in the last 2 weeks heard a pretty compelling story painted by the state in putting in their case, and now it's the time for the defense to start telling its story. Because the state's story has been so compelling, I think the defense has quite a challenge here. They need to overcome the numerous use of force experts and medical experts that the state brought to show that the use of force by Derek Chauvin was over the line, that it was his use of force that killed George Floyd and not an overdose or underlying medical conditions. And they had all of this video. As we've said many times, there's probably never been a crime that has been filmed by more video from more angles, and we have watched George Floyd die over and over and over again during the state's case. So we all know what happened. The question is why it happened, and that all goes to what was inside Derek Chauvin's mind at the time of these events. And this is the defense's opportunity to tell that story.
And so, Brock, I know that nothing has been said officially, and we don't know if Derek Chauvin will testify in his own defense. But as an experienced defense attorney, I'm wondering if you think he will need to, or if you think he will, depending on how things are going here.
That is a great question, Lou. And all defense attorneys, I think, start with the default setting that we don't want our clients to testify unless it's absolutely necessary. There are many pitfalls to testifying, to subjecting our clients to cross-examination by the state. And of course, we don't have to prove anything, at least theoretically. It's up to the state to prove our client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But every defense attorney in every trial faces this ultimate question of whether it makes sense to have their client testify. And here, because I think so much of the defense rests on what was or was not going on in Derek Chauvin's mind, and on the fact that we've seen all this video of the events, I think the pressure on Eric Nelson to have his client testify is going to be pretty strong here.
Okay, well, a couple questions. I think people are very interested by this topic. Why is it the default for defense attorneys that it's not? I mean, I know they don't have to testify, but why is it the default that defense attorneys don't want their client to testify? Well,
because again, the whole entire structure of the American trial system is set up that the defense does not have to prove anything, and the state has to prove our client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that our client's silence cannot be used against them. And so it's just a safer path to not have our client on the stand, not have them subject to questioning by the state. If our client testifies, prior things that our clients may have done in the past may come into play in ways that the state cannot bring up if our clients choose not to testify. Mm-hmm. There are just a lot of potential downsides in every case to having a client testify. But again, in some instances, it really ends up becoming necessary for the defense to tell its story through their client's testimony.
And so another thing I'm wondering, I've heard a lot of people say ultimately it's up to the defendant, up to the client. If they want to testify, you have to let them. But I'm wondering how it really works behind closed doors. Does the defense attorney say, you know what, I know you want to, but it's not going to help us? Like, what is that conversation like?
That absolutely happens. The behind the closed doors conversations between defense attorneys and their clients vary dramatically from case to case and client to client, but sometimes they're pretty contentious. Sometimes we have clients who absolutely want to get up and tell their story, and we as defense attorneys have to help them see the potential downsides of that. Potentially have somebody come in and serve as the role of a prosecutor and cross-examine them and help them understand what potential downsides there are, or if they choose to testify, help them prepare for the kinds of questions that they're going to face. But yes, it's ultimately up to the client to choose whether or not to testify, and there are cases where clients choose to testify over their defense attorney's advice.
Okay, well, we will interrupt you, Brock, as soon as we see movement in the courtroom here. But there's something else about this case that is unusual as far as high-profile cases ago that the public's paying close attention to, and that is that several witnesses don't have to testify because of they're asserting their Fifth Amendment rights, and that includes the other 3 officers who are charged in this case, who potentially, I assume, would be testifying on Chauvin's side to help him. I mean, the state might call them, but I mean, assuming because they're also charged in this that they might help Chauvin if they testified. And then also this other witness that we've talked about, Maurice Hall, who was in the car with George Floyd, and yesterday Judge Cahill ruled that he does not have to testify, and they can't even use, like what he told police and stuff like that. So can you explain from your perspective how that changes this case compared to how it might have been if all these other witnesses were allowed to testify?
Well, it's a good question, Lou. Here in this case, because of all the video, I don't know if the absence of those witnesses' testimony is going to have the same impact as it would if this alleged crime or crimes had not been filmed. We've seen again and again and again from every imaginable angle what happened here. We've heard what each of those 3 other officers were saying during the time this unfolded. We've seen Maurice Hall on video as well. And so hard to say exactly what the impact would be. I'm not entirely sure that if the other 3 officers were to testify in this case that they necessarily would side with Chauvin. Mm-hmm. That is an interesting question.
Right.
And their trials are coming up in August, and their defenses may involve pointing the finger at Chauvin.
Sure.
Yeah, and Brock, actually, that was my question for you. So we know that the other officers in this case, as you mentioned, their trials will be in August. Does their defense use anything that was said in this court case against the state? We had mentioned King checking for a pulse, or Lane asking to pull Floyd over to get him to breathe a little bit more. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, everything that happened in this trial is going to be fair game in the trials to come. Absolutely. Everything that happens on the record in sworn testimony and everywhere else in this trial is going to absolutely be used to the greatest extent possible by both the state and the defense in those upcoming trials. And you're right. You point out that Officer King checked his pulse. The other officer was maybe suggesting that they move Floyd into the side recovery position. And that's why I say I think that there's a chance that that those officers end up pointing the finger at Chauvin in their own trials and indicate that they were trying to mitigate the situation.
Right. So in your opinion, then, it sounds like this case might help those other officers.
It could well, depending on how it ultimately unfolds.
Okay.
All right. And so, Brock, as we are preparing to go back to the courtroom here, what do you think people should listen for and watch for as Eric Nelson begins to call his witnesses? Well,
again, Eric Nelson's opportunity to tell his client's story really begins today. I think his opening argument was not as much storytelling as just kind of reciting through the evidence. But I expect that beginning with his witnesses, we're going to start to see this alternative perspective, this alternative story being painted for us. We're going to be watching, I think, really closely for the use of force experts that he calls. We've had extensive amount of testimony presented by the state regarding use of force, including the crumbling of the infamous blue wall of silence, with multiple Minneapolis police officers testifying against Chauvin, as well as a couple of national use of force experts. We've watched the video, we've seen what happened, and it will be interesting to see what the defense use of experts have to say when they come in and attempt to paint this as a reasonable use of force. And similarly with the medical experts, we've had extensive testimony from medical experts, all of whom held Derek Chauvin responsible for George Floyd's death, say that this was not a drug overdose, this was not underlying medical conditions, and we will be watching to see how those defense experts come in and paint a contrary picture.
Thank you very